Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Robert Neller, says sending resources to the southern border has affected the readiness of the Corps. A deeper problem for the Corps, though, may be executing a foundational mission. Retired Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Dakota Wood is Senior Research Fellow for Defense Programs at the Center for National Defense at the Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy. You have a new report out on the Marine Corps with a few key takeaways. And the first takeaway is that the Corps hasn't sufficiently developed its ability to execute modern-era landing operations. Can you tell us more about the report and what you found?
Well, when people think about the Marine Corps, that's what they think about, amphibious operations.
Right.
And actually, by law, that's its primary mission. But it's been a long time, since they've been doing that, and it's no fault of the Marine Corps. I mean, we've had extended operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, landlocked countries, for nearly 20 years. So the Marine Corps itself has acknowledged it needs to get back to sea. It needs to work more intimately with the Navy and figure out how to conduct these at-sea naval campaign types of operations in the modern era. So they've identified a lot of shortfalls. We've tried to cover that in some of the report and make some recommendations to kind of help them get on their way.
Right. And when you were looking at it, do they need more money for sure, or is there a way they could do this kind of with the money that they have?
Well, more would be nice, right? So we've argued for a while that the Defense Department writ large is underfunded relative to historical need. But you look at the current budget and political environment, and nobody is expecting any additional funding. So for the Marine Corps, if they're overworked relative to the size of the service, they either need to cut back tasks that they're accepting, do less, if they're not going to expand the service, or they need to look internally and see where are we spending money and can we use that more effectively to accomplish our primary mission. They do lots of things and they do them very, very well. How does it relate to naval warfare? And
did you try to shape your recommendations assuming no additional infusion of funding?
We did. Yeah, we absolutely did. We think that, again, looking at the budget environment, you just can't ignore that. So we could say double the Marine Corps, well, it's just not going to happen.
Right.
So we think that and the Corps, the paper is actually really doubling down on experimentation. You can't predict with certainty what the future is going to be, but the more things you try, you experiment, see what new technologies give you, that might be a nice little supplemental to additional people. So start with experimentation, figure out what real-world problems need to be solved, find solutions to those that are low risk, and then you build on successes. Each one of those little successes leads to another one, and they would discover then what capabilities they actually need and how best to get there.
Interesting. And you mentioned before we started that some of these recommendations might be a little controversial. Could you talk a little about that?
More than a little. So that really gets to the section about where are they spending their money and where are they investing people. There's some things they just can't pull back on. You've got to recruit youngsters to come into the military. There are various high-profile missions that they're not likely to walk away from, like presidential helicopter fleet, Marine Security Guard detachments, and those kinds of things. So he said, well, you've got almost 3,000 Marines invested in Marine Special Operations Command, MARSOC. It's a relatively new thing for the Marine Corps. They were directed to do that in 2006. Certainly SOCOM, Special Operations Command, has been very busy globally, hunting down terrorists and doing other sorts of things that they do so well. And the Marine Corps really embraced that mission. So they're phenomenal in what they do abroad. How closely does that relate to their primary mission, which is naval warfare and supporting naval operations, naval campaigning, amphibiosity, that whole realm. So we talk about looking at the continued investment in MARSOC, and not surprisingly, those who are at that command, and I was there for about a year, some years ago, kind of took offense to that and very defensive, and we completely accept that, but I think it's a discussion that needs to happen.
What about the cyber piece? I thought that was another interesting recommendation.
Right. So cyber critical, both defensive and offensive, and usually it's your units that are on the ground close up against the enemy that know what they need to target and how they understand what the enemy is doing and how to mess with their systems across that line. A lot of stuff can be done remotely back here in the United States, but there's just something about being in the battle space. So all the services have pursued developing their own cyber capabilities. But that's another manpower requirement. It's a cost. So where the Marine Corps has drawn support from other services, like the Medical Corps, they don't have their own medical branch. They draw that support from the Navy. maybe MAR4 Cyber as another area they need to look at and say, how critical is it that we continue to invest in this particular area?
Yeah, and what would you need to make all your recommendations a reality? Would we need some legislative fixes, some proposals from the Pentagon? What would you think?
Well, it starts with the Marine Corps. So they need to be, I think, very bold. They need to be very realistic. Lots of things that they do well, lots of things that they would like to do. What can you do with available resources, and how does that relate to a future combat environment? We believe that for the Marine Corps, at least, and especially working with the Navy, that's in the Indo-Pacific region. China's a pacing threat over in that area per the National Defense Strategy. So the Marine Corps needs to, again, get serious about experimentation.
Yeah.
They have terrific operational concepts. The Marine Corps operating concept, littoral operations in a contested environment called Loki, and another one about setting up or establishing advanced bases inside the threat environment. Those are terrific documents. They need to put some reality behind that. So I think the Marine Corps assessing what they need, making suggestions to the SecNav and to the Secretary of Defense, and then Congress, I think, would follow right along with that.
Yeah, and just time for one more question. What would this mean for the Navy if they were to have sort of that return to that focus?
Right, yeah, huge ripple effect. So the Marine Corps in various studies has articulated a need for between 45 and 50 amphibious ships. The latest plan is to get to 38. They only have 32 in the Navy. Of those, about half are available on any given day. So you already have a shortage of amphibious shipping. The other piece to that, though, is they're all very large ships. You know, the smallest of that's about $1.4 billion per ship. They're phenomenally capable. But when you talk about distributed operations, you need smaller and more. You know, many smaller types of ships to do many more things in different places that don't present as big a signature. They're harder to find and to target. So as the Marine Corps pursues this distributed operations type of concept, it's going to ripple over into the Navy's shipbuilding plan, and the Navy, I don't think, is quite prepared for that. Although some great work has been done by an old retired captain by the name of Wayne Hughes out at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey. Huge fan of his work and the idea of distributed naval warfare, and again, something that the Navy needs to look at every much as the Marine Corps.
Well, thank you so much, Dakota Wood.